monocultural industrial agriculture. This is sugarcane, and nothing but sugarcane as far as the eye can see. No interactions, no diversity. Nothing that harmonises with the natural system. This doesn't occur in nature. Let's have a look at the soil here and see what it actually looks like. Although this is actually a ploughed field, I can hardly break up the soil. We've just got incredibly hard, compacted, dead soil. How did we end up like this? How did we end up supplying the food and the needs of humanity through totally unnatural processes, through simplistic systems? Famous chemist in history, von Liebig, in the 1800s discovered how he could manufacture sulfuric acid and then break down rocks, basic elements, and make a salt-based fertilizer just using NPK. That is all a plant needs to grow. That is our basic fertilizer. But for a plant to be really healthy, we need the additions of other elements to build its body, and that's where we've gone wrong. And we have no favouring of the soil through the salt-based fertilisers. They do not favour the soil life. So once we started this industrial fertiliser process, the soil fertility was continuously declining, and the costs are continuously rising, and they continue to rise in industrial agriculture, where with our organic and designed ecosystemic systems, our costs are dropping all the time, and the quality of our product is rising, and so is the quality of our soil. And that's what this video is all about, and we're going to take you through all the steps of composting, organic matter return, interactions of animals, plants, trees and wildlife, with the lessons of how to do it so you can feel more secure about your future food security and health. Hi, I'm Geoff Lawton, and this is Zaytuna Farm. I'm on roughly an acre of ground here, and you can see the animals grazing in the background. And there's quite a few animals there, and we have a few more horses and sheep and larger animals. We have chickens and poultry on the farm, and it looks like quite a lot of biomass. But the real biomass is in the topsoil. Here's a teaspoon of soil here, and in this teaspoon there's 1 billion bacteria, 1 million fungi, 10,000 amoebas, there's little protozoas and nematodes. The weight of biomass is actually this soil life. There can be easily 40 tonnes of life in an acre of topsoil, can be up to 200 tonnes of life in an acre of topsoil. What we have done with the soil life is we've destroyed it by digging and ploughing and turning the soil over. Now that does create fertility. If you start off with an ecosystem and you cut it down You take away the product, or you burn it, whatever you do with the living elements that are above the soil, and then you plough the soil and you turn that soil over, you destroy the soil life. And their dead bodies is the fertility that's released to the crops. So you're running on the dead organisms. Now, there's a timeline for that. It's a finite resource. If you're not farming in a harmonious way, if you're not gardening in a harmonious way, where you're putting back as much as you're taking out, it is going to end sooner or later. The real life, the real partnership we have to understand for sustainable design is partnering with the life in the soil. There is a really exciting web of life in the soil. It's an enormous diversity of organisms that can't photosynthesize, so they have to link to plants. And the ability for plants to capture carbon through photosynthesis and create exudates off their roots, which the organisms live from and exchange to with minerals. So the fungi, the bacteria, the protozoas, the nematodes, they go on out to larger organisms like worms and insects, right up to the large mammals, all interacting with that carbon exchange. It's an enormous diversity, and it's the diversity that gives it the quality and builds the quantity of beneficial high quality soil. So it's a very, very exciting and not much understood world of organisms, all in continuous symbiotic relationships, benefiting each other, extending all sorts of elements and minerals out through soil interdependency. It's a living system. Soil is alive, and that's what we have to work with. That's the important thing. That's where we have to link back to get a fertile, productive world. Here we are on the forest floor, and this is where the leaves end up, deciduous leaves falling onto the ground and decomposing down to become the humus, the water holding material. Here, the soil microbes and all kinds of little organisms start to break these materials down. The lignum fibre in the leaf, the cellulose in the leaf, all gradually decompose to become this extremely special material, humus. The material that gives us incredible stability in the topsoil and our ability to hold on to the fertilizer and give us the growth that we need to sustain everything we need to produce. Now, in recent years, the industrialization of processes towards productivity from the soil has destroyed the quality and very much the quantity of soil available to us. We have to reverse that. And to do it quickly, we have to build the diversity. We have to increase the numbers of organisms with the number of diversity that's available. They are not always present. So, to inoculate the soil is to bring in elements of life. Of those 50 million genus of bacteria, 50 million genus of fungi that are potentially available to us through capturing organisms in compost processes. By taking a very diverse mixture of compostable materials to make a compost as a humus that contains special organisms that are not presently available in our industrially destroyed and degraded soils. So your inoculum are the special elements that are missing from soils that have been badly degraded. And that increases our potential in both quality, speed, and quantity of soil production. Compost. We're going to take you through the process of making a simple compost that anybody can make almost anywhere. It's just a recipe of ingredients. Now, we've got different manures here that we've gathered from animals around the farm. We've got different carbon materials, as in some dried grass clippings. We've got some green grass clippings. We've got some woody mulch. And I'm going to show you the materials, and then we're going to put it together. And as I do, I'm going to explain to you the basic rules of the recipe so that you can always get it right and it'll always work for you, and what the intention is at the end, what it is you end up with as a product. Let's have a look at some of our materials here. Here we have some goat manure. Here we have some cow manure. Here we have some duck manure from the duck pen. All of these manures will work for you. Here we have some chicken manure mixed in with straw. Over here we even have some old pig manure. Right? It doesn't really matter which manure, but if you use a mixture of manures, you'll get a different set of mineral components. Now, that's the fire, that's the nitrogen component, mostly. And here we have some dry grass clippings that have just come off the fields and the paddocks. It's just been slashed with a tractor and raked up. It's not too long, it's reasonably short. You don't want it really, really long, it'll make it hard to turn over. Here we have another component. This is sawdust mixed with compost toilet manure. So this is human manure mixed in. This is human manure that's come out of a compost toilet after it's been sitting for about 3 to 4 months. So it's well processed. It's no longer got any pathogens in it. Over on this side we have some green grass clippings. This is green material, and on this green material you'll find there's, if we had to look at this in a microscope, there'd be quite a few soil organisms, and they're kind of captured on here. This is like capturing a yeast. The organisms come with the green material, so we're kind of inoculating with this. We come over this way, we have some wood mulch. These are shredded up hardwood and softwood trees and weed trees. It's been through a shredder. There's actually a worm there. Compost worm already there. This is the fungal food. The fungus likes to break down the wood. Fungus will break down the lignum fibre. So this is good fungal food. The manures are good nitrogen food. And the green material have a lot of organisms captured, particularly things like protozoas. Over this way, this is what we're going to end up with. We're going to end up with a compost. This is quite a woody compost, got quite a lot of woody material. It's probably quite high in fungus. Good material for fertilizing trees because it'll have good fungal dominated life in it. Trees need fungus. A forest grows on a fallen forest, so you have to make a compost that has a lot of fungal organisms, because fungal dominated soils are much better for growing woody trees. Here are the fungal threads, the hyphae, that travel long distances through the soil and break down the lignum fibre of the wood. The fungal threads in the soil, the hyphae, travel for kilometres down and kilometres away from the tree. They come to the trees for the photosynthetic interaction. There they harvest the carbon. They can't photosynthesize, but they can capture elements out at great distance with acid tips that bring back phosphates and other minerals and exchange them with the roots at the root level with the trees in the forest. This is an important situation because there's an actual communication between the stress reaction of the tree transferred through the fungal threads to other trees. This is the internet of the soil. The fungi spores are very easily damaged by inappropriate land use. If there's too much compaction, too much disturbance, too much ploughing, too much chemicals, too much overuse, you'll actually get to a stage where you may have to bring in fungal spores in well-inoculated compost so that you can reintroduce the diversity for a quick recovery. Plants that are herbaceous, non-woody, you're more likely to need a bacterial-dominated compost, because the pastures and the vegetable gardens, they favour a nitrogen-rich soil. So a bacterially dominated soil is higher in nitrogen, and it grows those faster cycles of non-woody plants. I'm going to take the carbon material, and we're just going to make a nice fluffy bottom to this, because we want the compost to be aerated at the bottom. We want a nice loose, you can use small sticks if you've got them. Now we're going to have to make 1 cubic metre minimum. That's 1,000 litres. If you try and make a compost any smaller than that, it just won't get hot enough. You have to make sure that it's got the right size, otherwise it won't get up to the right temperature. It's like not having a hot enough oven to cook the cake. Bit of cow manure. Now, the aim is to have 25 parts carbon and 1 part nitrogen. Then the decomposition happens without reducing the size of the material. So we try and mix this up with the right proportion so that it gets hot enough, but it doesn't actually lose any volume. The trick of making good compost is to not lose size. You're going to end up with a cubic metre the same as what you started. That's something a lot of people don't believe is possible, but it is possible. We've done it many times, and it's a good indicator that you've got the right mix. If you have too much nitrogen, it'll break down too quickly, and it will start to lose size. It will get very hot, but you'll waste a lot of material because the volume will decrease rapidly, and it will be very smelly as it decomposes. You'll produce a lot of methane. If you've got the right size and you've got the right proportions of carbon to nitrogen ratio, and this is part of the carbon I'm putting on now, what will happen is it won't smell very much, it will get up to temperature, but it won't decrease in size very much at all. Now the temperature we're going to have to aim for is a minimum of 50 degrees centigrade. If it doesn't get to 50 degrees centigrade, it won't have broken down all the weed seeds, and it won't have anywhere near the same amount of life in it. Now the maximum temperature you could get to is 70 degrees centigrade, and that's getting a little bit too hot. It's probably going to get anaerobic at that temperature. It's going to go a bit airless. And you've actually gone past the limit a little bit on life. We now realise, looking with a microscope, the best temperature is around 55 to 65. That's the range where there's most diversity of life and most volume of life. Just right here in the middle of the pile, we could add some kind of inoculum. I'll cover it up quite quickly. That's a bit of a remains of a dead animal processed on the farm. You can use urine as an inoculum. You can use comfrey as an inoculum. You can use nettles, and you could use yarrow. You could use fish, or a dead animal that might even just be something you found as a roadkill on the side of the road. It will break down quite quickly in there, and it'll speed up the decomposition. This is comfrey, and it's one of the compost activators. You don't have to add an activator, but it can help get your initial heat up. So we're going to construct it, and then we're going to leave it for 4 days. And in those 4 days, the organisms are going to get their breed population started. Going to start to build up their numbers, and then after 4 days we're going to turn it again, and that'll mix a lot of things together, and it'll also kill a lot of organisms, and their bodies are going to be consumed by the next generation of organisms. So this is a sort of thermonuclear life and death cycle. All these little organism colonies are going to burst into life and multiply rapidly and create a lot of heat. There's a lot of breeding going on. It's going to be a little bit cooler on the outside. And when we turn it over, we're going to make the party turn inside out. What's a bit cool and passive on the outside is going to go to the inside and become hot and steamy and very active. The process then will start to take organism to organism, body to body. One colony becomes another colony as it's consumed the dead bodies of the previous party. And the carbon, which life is based in, is going to bond the nitrogen and all the other elements into a humus, a stable humus. Carbon is the sponge, nitrogen is the fuel, and any other elements that are involved then become additions to long chain carbon molecules. So the long chain carbon molecules stick the process together. They become the sponge. Nitrogen's the fuel, and everything else adds a little spice to the event. Even toxic substances, even if there's a little bit of toxicity here in some of these materials, that'll get locked up. That'll get locked up in the long chain carbon molecules and become inert. This is one of the great things about the natural system. It really is ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And these cycles bond up the toxicity, so it's not a problem anymore. That's how the environment neutralizes the effects of toxins. And we're just putting these, the most diverse environment of life in the known universe, the soil organisms. We're putting them to work for us. We couldn't have more workers. And that becomes very obvious when you look in the microscope. We could even add a bit of charcoal at this stage. Charcoal has an enormous surface area, and it creates a habitat for the organisms. So what you've really got is a high density housing commission for soil bacteria. That charcoal, with its enormous surface area, a tablespoon of dissolved charcoal can have a surface area of up to 10 acres. That gives an attachment for the organisms to take up residence and hold the fertility in the life form, so it can't be leached. It's not the soil itself, it's the soil life that's the most important element. We really need a little bit of chunky material at the end, so there's still some food for the fungus. And we don't want it to completely cool down. In the end, it'll be just warm. It won't be completely cold, and it also won't be totally black. A little bit chunky, just warm, and dark brown. And more or less the same size. I don't like to make it in a walled-in area because it doesn't have enough air around it. You've got to be careful. This is an aerobic compost. They're aerobic organisms that we're trying to produce. Now we've just got to add a little bit of water to make sure we've got it wet enough. Now, what if you haven't got a temperature gauge? Well, you have to know what day it's going to get the hottest. And we're going to leave this for 4 days, then we're going to turn it. It'll be quite hot by then. But then we're going to turn it every other day for 14 days. So in 18 days, that's the quickest you can do it. 18 days it should be ready. Now on the second or third turn, so that's 6 or 8 days later, this will be its hottest. And it should get between 55 and 65. Hotter than 50, no hotter than 70. How do you tell that it's hot if you haven't got a thermometer? Well, if you put your hand in the 50 degrees centigrade, it's warm. You go, ooh, that's hot. And you just don't put your hand in the 70 degrees centigrade. It's very hot. A basic gauge of how wet the compost should be. How much moisture should I put on this compost? Let's get some average material. And I crunch it up in my hand. And I give it a really good squeeze. There, it should just drip. It should just drip. That's the moisture test without any laboratory, without any equipment. It's just a squeeze test. A squeeze test and an ouch test up to your elbow. The rest of it's all down to the microbiology doing their thing, having a bit of a party going on. Nothing special about this. We've just got to cover it up. What are we going to end up with? We're going to end up with 1 cubic meter of inoculum compost, not just compost that's broken down with enzymes, but compost that's high in beneficial soil life. that can be bred out in our soil through our mulch covered garden beds, through our cover crops. And 1 cubic metre of fertiliser like this, added carefully to a garden, out through your crop growing area, is enough fertiliser, a minimum, but it's enough fertiliser if you use it carefully to grow all the food for one person for 1 year. Let me show you something really unusual. Here's a compost heap with heat that we're using to heat water for showers. This is free.
Going for a shower now?
Oh, go right ahead. This is pyrolysis. This is the heat of the organisms in the heap heating the hot water in the plastic pipe, the irrigation pipe that's inside the compost heap. 150 metres of hose heats the water. It gives you a 5-minute shower. 5 minutes later, it's hot again. A 5-minute recharge. A wonderful system. Lasts for 6 to 8 weeks of free hot water. And at the end of it, you have 2 cubic metres of high quality fertiliser.
Hot, very good shower.
Here it is. We've got it covered up so it doesn't get too wet in the rain. And the heat is inside there. As I go in, if I go in far enough, I'll get to the actual hot water pipes. And there's the steam coming. You can start to see a bit of steam coming out of the heat now. And if you make a big enough heap, you'll get hot water for 6 months and you'll grow all your food for a year on the size heap. So at a 10-metre heap, John Pan, the famous researcher on compost and heating hot water, famous Frenchman, John Pan wrote the book Another Kind of Garden, and he ended up researching on compost heat. He made heaps that were 10 cubic metres in size and heated the house central heating system, the radiators, for 6 months of the year, and grew a year's supply of food on the 10 metres of compost every year. Great system. The power of compost. Couldn't be better. Basic physics. It's physics and biology in partnership together, working as a unified system. This heap's 4 days old now. It's been sitting here for 4 days, and we're going to give it its first turn, so we should see some temperature. So what we have to do here ideally is peel the outside, because what is on the outside needs to go into the middle. I'm going to dive in deep into the compost just to give you an idea of how much heat there is. See that steam's coming now? This is where you realise you've got to have material that's chopped up, not just for the surface area that all the little organisms can start processing, but also just so it's easier to turn. You know that most of these organisms haven't even got a name yet scientifically. What you're really looking for is diversity and large numbers in quantity. So you're looking at how much you have in diversity and quantity in the compost. If you become a master at composting, probably means you spent 5,000 hours doing these sort of things. After 5,000 hours, I can tell you, you start to understand the process very, very well. But I'm trying to share that knowledge with you. I've made thousands of these heaps, and I literally mean thousands. And I've seen the equation of different combinations, different recipes. There's no limit to the diversity you can put in. There's no limit to what elements can't go into a heap that you need to gauge. Has it lived? It can live again. If it's lived before, it can live again in the compost. But once you get the recipe right, once you've got the cake cooking, once you've got this interaction between carbon and nitrogen, all the other interesting elements that make up the living systems of Earth, they can all be included. So it should be the same size, dark brown, fine material, just warm, have a nice smell, and not look like any of this material we started off. It doesn't look like anything it started off as. It's a bonded, constructed humus fertilizer. It's an imitation of what happens under the forest in a concentrated form by design. We've done it for ourselves. Easy. You can turn one of these in half an hour, 8 turns later, over 18 days, you've done 4 hours work doing something meaningful. It's part of planetary repair. It's part of the equation of permaculture design and understanding what we have to do to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. This garden's 8 years old and it's set up in a functional pattern. It's on contour. They also harvest water to this contour growing bed, which is set up to be exactly the right width that I can reach to the middle, and from the other footpath on the opposite side I can reach to the middle. It means that I don't walk or compact the soil, because it's very important that I can get across the garden and actually not damage the soil by compressing it, which squeezes the air out, which makes it potentially more acid because of that, and actually damages the millions and billions and gazillions of little organisms that are in that soil, that we've spent 8 years building. This relationship, this soil ecosystem has been built in this soil. I'm adding a little bit of compost around some of these plants. Just a little bit of added fertilizer for the soil organisms. And we can add a little handful of compost here and there around the base of these plants, and they'll pick right up. They'll grow really well. You only need a little bit every now and again. I'll encourage the organisms to come in and interact with these plants so they can go to work feeding these plants and interacting with the minerals in the soil and the elements in the soil that they can give to these plants in exchange for the starch that these little plants are making right now from the sunlight shining on the leaves, and through photosynthesis they have a surplus of starch which they can exude to the soil and exchange for minerals through a partnership of interaction with soil life. We've chosen a kind of matrix of complication, so visually it doesn't look like one species. We've got perennials down the edge. It's a society garlic, so it's given off a smell that actually makes it confusing to pests. We've got red leaves, green leaves, a little bit of purple leaf, feathery leaves, frilly leaves, combinations of shapes, combinations of colours, combination of form, a little bit of chaos in cooperative confusion, so that any pest that comes into this garden is confused by the smell, the colour, the forms and the patterning. And yet the whole garden is patterned to be double reach to the middle, on contour. And the other thing we've done is we've favoured the predators. So we have little ponds that favour frogs. We have garden perches and bird perches and bird baths that favour the predatory birds that come in. And we've got little rockeries that favour the lizards. All of these are predators of garden pests. So we're favouring the predators and confusing the pests. There's one of our birds. They're wild birds. They're interacting with our cooperative action. They like what we're doing. And any pest that comes in here is quickly confused. And a confused pest where you have favoured predator habitat is just eaten very quickly, and then later on through the digestion of the birds or digestion of the lizards or digestion of the frogs comes down as predator poop, fertiliser to the garden. Another inoculum of interesting soil life additive. So how do you do that? Well, that's a raised bed, and as you can see from the moisture that's around, we're in quite a damp climate. So we need to raise the garden bed. So we've dug the footpath, we've pegged it to wheelbarrow width so it's practical. We've got our main delivery vehicle, the wheelbarrow, to bring material in and take material out in the form of food. We've dug the footpath, we've made the raised bed with what's come out of the footpath, and then we've added our compost. So we've added compost to the soil, right? This is full of the soil organisms, and now we're going to plant our crops and add our mulch. The mulch, the straw and the grasses that protect the soil and keep it at a nice moisture and temperature, not too hot, not too cold, they'll feed the soil organisms, and so will the growing roots of the plants. So we're going into a raised bed system because here we're in a humid climate with quite a bit of rain. In a climate that's more arid, where we have very dry, hot conditions, we'll go the other way and we'll garden with a sunken bed, a bed that's actually the opposite. So we're retaining moisture, we're retaining a cool growing condition because it's too hot most of the time. And we'll actually put a shade over the top to reduce the amount of sunlight because we want to diminish the drying and evaporating effect. To start a garden, you need to put in about a cubic metre of compost to 1,000 cubic metres of growing bed. So you can go 2 cubic metres to 1,000 metres of growing bed if you like, or more. So you go right up to 20 cubic metres to 1 hectare. That starts the process off, and you don't need to add as much after that because you're returning plant nutrients, you're returning plant food. So from here on, we can start now planting our vegetable seedlings. So we'll take our trays of vegetable seedlings and we'll start to plant out our rows. Once we've got those planted, we can then start to mulch our garden and insulate it from all the conditions of sun, evaporation and leaching of rain, because the mulch will be like an insulation blanket holding moisture like the forest litter. It'll hold 1/3 of its thickness will be held up in moisture. So we'll have, if we have 3 inches of mulch, it'll hold 1 inch of water. And the difference between a mulch bed and a bare soil bed is it takes 1/10 the amount of moisture to keep the plants growing. So a bare soil bed takes 10 times the amount of water that a mulch bed requires. So we can really reduce the amount of water needed, and the moisture is also held up in the life in the soil. The life in the soil is, like all life, based in carbon and water. Oh, you've caught me littering. I'm throwing out the garbage. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I am actually throwing out the garbage. I'm putting down old trees. I'm putting down paper and cardboard which were made from trees. I'm putting down a sheet mulch. And I can put it down in a really rough form. There's old books here. I've put down a bit of manure. There's old paper bags. There's those silly things that arrive in the post all the time. There's egg cartons. There's a haphazard mix of stuff. If you like it a bit tidy in this, although you're not going to see it, you can put down big layers of cardboard like this. You can put it down straight on the grass after you put down a bit of manure. You could put down a bit of cardboard. You could put down a bit of compost. You could put down some actual vegetable scraps from your kitchen. All of it will feed the worms. Put down your big cartons. What you're doing is you're sheet mulching and you're cutting out all the light. Some of those weed seeds only take a 30th of a second of flash of light. If you want to start doing double digging, you're going to have to dig pretty quick to get it quicker than a 30th of a second. That's really nice stuff because it stays moist. And the speed that moisture goes through this material is extremely slowly. It's almost, not quite, it's almost as slow as plants' roots themselves move. Now you're in the business, now you're in the game, now you're at the right timing. So, the next, I don't want to mulch the dog, although she's probably been pretty good. I'm going to put down a load of rough mulch. Now what I'm doing, and it could be tidier than this too, but this will work fine. I'm imitating the forest floor. The soil organisms down there, those millions of organisms, tons and tons of them in every square metre, there's millions. In acres, there's tons of organisms, literally tons by weight. They think, if they think at all, right now they're thinking that a beautiful forest has just landed on top. This imitates the forest litter. And you can't really go too thick. You can definitely go too thin. Just shake it up a bit, shake it down, pat it down. These are all cheap materials. This is not expensive straw. This is just slashings off your local park, lawn, mixtures of organic material, pruning, shredded, hay, seeded hay. There's a bit of old vegetable scrap there. That can go on. It's all a great big feed for the soil. This will hold huge amounts of moisture. This will be warmer in winter at the soil surface. It'll be cooler in summer at the soil surface. Moderate in temperature. It will greatly moderate the water flows. 1/10 the amount of water required, which is crucial if you have a water shortage or a watering ban. But most important, it's benefiting those wonderful organisms in the soil that we need to cooperate with, harmonise with. We'll tuck that little bit of paper underneath there. Don't leave any paper showing. Tuck it in, just like you're tucking your children into bed, because these are like your children. They'll feed your children with some of the best food that can be grown on this planet. Food like this. Food like this. Students of mine have put these together just for a bit of personal therapy and understanding that this is a very simple, instant garden system. So that's done. It's done. Double reach bed, I can reach in the middle. Double reach bed, I could almost use it as a bed. You could almost lie down on it. I don't want to lie down on it because I don't want to compact it. I don't want to crush all those organisms in there. I want them to be very active. All I have to do now is I have to make a little hole like this, get down to that cardboard, make that a nice little smooth hole, and make a hole in the cardboard. I might be stabbing a few organisms, but that's all right. There's plenty there. I then get my compost, put it in this hole, pat it down a little bit, make sure it's nice and cozy, and put my seedling in there, or my seed, and it'll do that. It'll grow a vegetable garden, and it will get better and better over time. Here we are, the instant garden. After just 5 weeks, our pak choi, our lettuces, our cabbages are coming along, everything's happy, and underneath here we're building soil. We've got soil building layers of mulch, the cardboard's still here, and the worms, here they are. There's a little worm here, there's worms in here, there's soil building activity with bacteria, fungi, all kinds of imitations of layers. This system is so simple, but it creates soil as quick as it creates surplus produce with so little work to establish it. This is the ultimate easy. Use surplus material. This is the easy system to put an instant garden together, and it will create 1/2 inch, 1 centimetre, 2 centimetres, 3, 4 or even 5 centimetres of soil in 1 year as you garden. You are never sustainable in a garden unless you're creating more soil than you are using to produce. You must be creating soil as you produce your food, and then you're sustainable. And if you keep going that way and using that as the indicator, soil creation, you'll be sustainable forever. And you'll be on a great learning curve of understanding how to interact with the soil and the soil ecosystems to supply an incredibly diverse possibility of food for you and your family. Interacting with the natural world in a productive way should be fun. It shouldn't be something that's annoying, or it shouldn't be something where you're getting stressed and disturbed. But a lot of people do, especially over things like weeds. Weeds are just plant elements that fit into particular niches. In every square metre of soil, there can be up to 2,000 potential seeds that will germinate, given the right conditions. Now, those conditions vary. So, if we burn the landscape and we have a big fire on top of the soil, if you step back and watch what happens, the weeds that germinate are weeds that their bodies are high in potassium, because the fire burns off potassium. The germination condition here, which is the important thing, not the weed. The weed is only the symptom of the germination condition. The weeds, the plants that come after fire, are harvesting potassium from a potassium deficient germination zone. If instead that same piece of land we compact and knock all the air out of the soil and compact it very, very hard and step back, different weeds germinate. Now we get dandelions in lawns and deep tap-rooted plants as a common function of decompacting germination condition. The plants that germinate on compacted soil have deep tap roots, and their function is to decompact the soil. Nature's in no particular hurry. When that plant dies, that long taproot is a compost corridor into the soil, a perfect infiltration mechanism for air, nutrient and water. If we go the other way, and on that same piece of land, we plough and till and dig and loosen the soil and keep it loose for a while and then walk away and watch, We don't get fireweeds now that harvest potassium. We don't get deep tap-rooted decompactors. We get plants that have a very dense fine hair root that hold the soil together. Their germination condition is soil that is too loose and susceptible to wind erosion and as easily washed or blown away. These are hairnet roots. If the soil has been overworked and it needs to recover and it needs more organic matter, which typically the tropics often do, and it's very easy to overwork those soils, then the first pioneer plants, the plants we call weeds, are usually nitrogen fixing plants, plants that are legumes, the beans and pea family, which have root attachment bacteria on their roots which are high in nitrogen that bring the nitrogen content up. Once that nitrogen content's up, off you go into succession towards a climax ecosystem of very sophisticated plants and animal interactions. But the initial stage, the one we should be most interested in, is the one we get most stressed about. Weeds don't germinate in compost. High quality compost will only germinate sophisticated, high quality forest trees or high quality rainforest trees or woodland trees. Because the soil condition is so good, there is no germination condition for those reparative weeds. Let's make sure we are friendly to our weeds and learn the lessons they have to teach us about landscape repair. From the weeds and the lessons they tell us to the cover crop and the lesson we apply. This is a colony of Rhizobium bacteria, rhizome meaning root, and they associate with this particular plant. In this case it's a lupin, a white lupin cover crop, and they live on the root. They're not part of the plant, and they take starch from the plant, which it makes freely with photosynthesis, and they give back nitrogen. So these type of plants, the peas and the beans, the legume family, they're high in nitrogen because they get it freely available from the nitrogen given to them from these Rhizobium bacterial colonies attached to the roots. Now they get the nitrogen from the nitrogen in the air that's in the soil. That's why it's so important to have nice, loose, airy soil that's not compacted, so the bacteria can get their nitrogen supply and give it to their plant, and in exchange get their carbon for free. And that's starch and carbon, the building blocks of life. We're on a swell where we've spread a cover crop, and we've got 3 different types of cover crop here. They're all nitrogen fixing plants. We've got a vetch and a lupin and a pea, and they're very important to stabilize the soil after the earthworks. But this is an important function of root interaction. The exudates of the roots feeding the organisms. These organisms in this soil won't starve. They've got lots of partners in these valuable little cover crops. They also fix nitrogen, so it's a fertilizer in itself. But very important that they're feeding and interacting with the soil microbes. So if we add compost, or if we add compost tea or any kind of organic fertilizer, we're making sure the plant sugars and the interactions with the roots are happening with our cover crop. Crucial. This is the first layer in the succession. The very first set of plants that start the process of repair, so that we can go on and establish productive trees, support species, and put this into a food forest planting along this swale. The very first start is the ground cover. It starts the process of repair and starts the interaction of the organisms in the soil so they can continue to feed the landscape. There are so many different types of soil, and there are so many different tests you can do. But you really don't need to get all worried about what type of soil you have too much, because we're creating soil as we garden, because we're partnering with natural processes, we're creating soil. If we're sustainable, we're not degrading soil. In fact, we should be creating soil. So what do we look for in a soil? How do we examine one type of soil to another? They're different colours here, but they're definitely different textures. So over here, I have a soil that's really hardly a soil at all. It's really like a clay. It's a sand mixed with a clay, and we can make it into a sausage. It's a very, very clayey soil, and this wouldn't be very well drained. So that's one particular soil. Here we have another clayey mix, but this is a basalt soil. It's a dark chocolate brown. When we squeeze it, it does make a bit of a sausage easily. It would roll out, but when we try and bend it, it cracks. And you can't quite hear any sand in it. There's not a lot of large particles. I can't feel much on my hands. This one looks quite similar, but this is a sandy loam. There's not a lot of clay in this. It's really hard to get this to, it really won't go into a sausage. I'll try it. I can squeeze it into a ball, but it just falls apart. It won't go into a sausage. And I can hear the sand. That's a sharp sandy loam. Easy to dig, very well drained. Now over here we have a red soil. This is a volcanic soil. And it's got a bit of clay in it. It'll squeeze up a bit. It will nearly roll, but it won't really hold together. There, I've just rolled it up into a bit of a sausage. As soon as I try and put any kind of tension on it, it just falls apart. This has some clay and some fine volcanic material. So there's a red volcanic soil. Probably quite a lot of minerals in it. But remember, we're not exploiting the soil. We're just working with it. Over here, I have a fine soil. This soil's very fine. There's no large particles in it. It's a lighter brown than the basalt. It's got some clay particles, but this is a river silt. This is a mixture of river flat soil, a little bit of sand, a little bit of silt, a little bit of clay. It's a whole mixture of river flat soil. Probably quite fertile, but again, we don't really want to exploit the soil. We want to work with it. We'll work with the textures. We'll adapt the type of systems we use. It smells good. It smells earthy, as if it has a lot of organic matter. This one, no smell at all. Not a lot of organic matter in there. It's really just red. The basalt smells quite earthy too, but the clay content is probably actually holding that up a bit. Yeah, it smells quite earthy when you finger your way through it. Okay, our sandy soil. It is darker than the grey sand it originates as, and it also has quite a bit of organic matter. And then we have our clay. Can't really smell it in there at all. That's airless, that clay's airless, and I'd gamble that's a little bit acid. This soil, being very sandy, has got a lot of air in it. It's probably nowhere near as acid, and if it was in a desert, it would definitely be alkaline. So what's the difference there? Alkalinity and acidity. They're what we call the pH scale. If it's a low number on the pH scale, it's acid. If it's a high number, it's alkaline. Dry environments, sandy soils, the beach, the desert, they're alkaline. They're more caustic. And the waterlogged soils and the wet, humid environments, they're acid. We could adjust the acidity with lime, and we could adjust the alkalinity with sulfur. But in nature, you don't really need to do that. it's the environment and the organisms and the life that actually adjust the pH closer to being a neutral pH. We can adjust our pH a little bit with lime and sulfur if we like, but if we're doing the right thing, the pH will adjust itself with all the life cycles. If we have a neutral pH or a pH that's close to neutral, more of the elements of the soil are available to the plants. And if it goes a little bit acid, some plants will germinate because they'll prefer that acid condition. Thistles harvest iron and copper when the pH is a little bit away from neutral, and they're a good indicator of pH condition. So you can use your weeds as indicators of pH as well. It's another system of soil analysis, but we prefer a pH just a little bit acid for our gardens. 6, 6.5, they're good pHs, just a slight bit acid, and the full supermarket shop of the soil is open, and the plant roots can go shopping and get everything they want. Increase your organic matter, increase your soil life by adding food to the soil, add organic matter on top of the soil, moderate its temperature, get it to moderate itself, its own pH, be careful adding lime and sulfur. We can actually garden on anything. We need material to make soil. We need material to add to the soil, to decompose. And convenient trees like this ice cream bean, which is a legume, it fixes nitrogen, and it recovers from a cut, can be put to work not only to fix nitrogen, but to create organic matter we can add to the soil. This creates the soil building material for us, a convenient element. And every time we cut it, the roots underneath pull back and they add compost corridors to the soil. They decompose, and the leaves we break off decompose. We're adding to the soil on the top and lower down, building structure, creating good pathways for organisms to facilitate that soil creation. Functional placement of useful elements by choice. That's permaculture soil creation in a good, rugged, functional way. Worm farms are another way you can make compost. The compost worm farm with compost worms makes this beautiful ingredient. It's a very sticky, very fertile, very bacterially dominated fertilizer, a solid material produced in just 3 months. All you need is an old bath, or a sink will do it if you want a small one. Half fill it up with manure, horse, cow or sheep. A ruminant manure is good. If you're going to use chicken manure, use a little bit less. Fill the rest up with vegetable scraps, vegetation. Anything can go in there that's been alive, really. Make sure it's got a drain, because what comes out the bottom is this beautiful liquid. That's a liquid fertilizer for your garden. And you can conveniently add to this every day. You don't need a lot of space. It's not like composting in a big pile. This takes up a small amount of room. It'll even fit on your balcony in the suburbs. You'll get a large population of worms in here, and there's great material. A beautiful, high quality, colloidal substance that will feed your garden, feed your plants, and give you plenty of good, rich mineral health in your food. Compost worm farming. Great stuff. These are actually weeds out of the garden. So problems in the garden become solutions in the duck pen. Later on become solutions in the garden. Underneath here there's earthworms. Lots of them. Compost worms. That's a big earthworm. Beautiful reflections on the skin. Now that has hundreds of thousands of varieties of bacteria in its intestinal tract. The manure of these worms is actually full of beneficial bacteria. Now when we then add this to our duck food, it goes through the duck and gets an even more diverse variation of bacteria inoculum. This worm actually goes through the mulch and the soil. There's another one. Whoa, look, there's another one here coming through the mulch. He's trying to escape. They know there's a few ducks around, I expect. So, duck, 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 duck. Worms have been living in the organic matter, which is high in carbon, and they've been actually feeding on the duck manure that's soaking through. But they're much lower down than the ducks can get to. So if I expose them, they're duck food. There you go. That's an unhappy worm, but a very happy duck. And we've got some very happy soil organisms when we take this manured mulch to the garden. So we have manured water, we have manured mulch, we have happy ducks, we have a very large population of worms, and unless we feed them to our ducks, they're pretty happy. They're creating all kinds of additives that are beneficial to soil organisms. We've just got to put it in a good relationship pattern that's easy for us to use. That's what permaculture is about. Getting beneficial elements patterned so we get a very, very easy to work, energy efficient relationship, and we get the benefit of the product. Here we have a end result of ducks and geese using their pond, which they'll always manure, and the water by gravity ends up here. We just set it up in that way so that it easily delivers itself here to this tap, and we fill this up and it's just well manured water from happy ducks and geese. Happy ducks, happy plants, happy soil organisms. Everything benefits, and we just easily deliver it to the garden. And we fill the pond back up, and tomorrow they'll deliver some more. I'm inside the chicken pen. It's actually a straw yard. We've piled up all this organic matter, which is waste material. It's old crop residue, scraps from the kitchen, plus a lot of weeds, which are a problem in the garden and in our growing systems. But here, they're turned into a solution. So down here on the lower part of the straw yard, the chickens tend to kick everything downhill. All the weeds and vegetation and veggie scraps have started to really break down here. And here's a harvest, literally turning waste into wealth. Here are the worms again. Here they are. And that's ideal chicken food, but they're existing down in these lower layers where the chickens can't quite scratch down to. So we've got happy chickens. We've got happy gardeners who've got great compostable material and super high quality mulch that we can put around our fruit trees, we can turn into compost, we can feed the soil. The choice is up to us how we want to use a material like this. They spend some of the time in here, and then the rest of the time they go out and free range through our food forest systems where they're really happy scratching around our trees, breaking the pest cycles and weed cycles again, and aerating the soil by very light scratching. So I'll feed the chickens with a little bit of food around the fruit trees that I want fertilised. So they'll all gather up around those trees, and they'll spend more time scratching and fertilising in a particular area. And if I concentrate it around the fruit trees, those trees get a little bit more attention from the birds, a little bit more soil processing, a little bit more weeding, a little bit more fertiliser. And here's a guava. They're underneath a little Hawaiian guava here, and that's a tree that gets fruit fly. So any fruit that drops on the ground can have fruit fly eggs in it and larvae that hatch, but not with these birds here. They're going to process those fruit fly larvae and break all the pest cycles. So we're happy about that. They're happy about that. Okay, from small animals like chickens and ducks, let's have a look how we work with the larger animals on the landscape. Grazing animals can be used to actually repair country and condition the soil by moving the animals in a natural pattern across pasture, like a tight packed herd of animals on a savanna. In a natural sense, they're tight packed by predators. Here, we're grazing them in small cells, moved regularly, so that animals eat their way across the country, spreading the diversity of the pasture with their manure, imprinting the topsoil with their hooves, and only taking a top bite off the pasture grasses and herbage, actually tearing away at the plants, so they're loosening topsoil rather than compacting, then quickly moved and quickly moved again. In this way, we're increasing soil fertility, we're increasing soil depth, we've got high quality animals and good quality land condition. By not overgrazing, by not over-compacting, by only grazing off the tops of the pasture, herbage and grasses, the plants are not stressed. The topsoil is actually enhanced by the fast recovery of the root zone. The interactions between the roots, the exudates of the roots and the soil life. This actually gives the animals a better feed and a better soil condition to feed from. Better mineral uptake. This is a much more sustainable way to go about grazing landscape, as in a natural pattern. If we're going to take these quality products off the landscape, then how are we going to maintain the fertility of the soil? Okay, I'm going to make a mineral mix for you, and this will be roughly what we'll give our cows on a per cow recipe. So I start off with a little bit of copper sulfate, and I've got the boiling water in there. It's quite hot water, it's just come out of the kettle, and I make sure that I've dissolved the copper sulfate. Now, copper sulfate is a poison, but it helps worm the cows, keeps them parasite free, and all the animals. But it must be melded right down, so there it is, melded down. Then I get a little bit of dolomite, but twice as much as the copper sulfate, and that will neutralize the poisoning effect of the copper sulfate. So there it is, neutralized, but it'll also make it quite alkaline. So we have quite an alkaline mixture. That's a special animal dolomite, easy for the animals to digest. I then get an equal, twice as much as the copper sulfate, but equal to the dolomite, tablespoon here of sulfur. That is quite acid. It doesn't really want to mix with the alkalinity, but that neutralizes the alkaline effect of the dolomite. So now we're back to neutral. Now here's some rock dust. This is rock dust with all the Earth's minerals mixed in a fine rock dust powder. So this is food for the organisms in the soil, but it has to go through the organisms in the soil before it becomes available to the plants. They are the transfer mechanism. So there goes the rock dust. I'll put an extra bit in there, another tablespoon. Now here is powdered kelp, a high quality powdered kelp, and that is all the minerals from the ocean. So rock dust with the minerals from the land, kelp with the minerals from the ocean. Let's mix that together. Now we're getting quite a brew. Now, just to bring it up to a little bit of natural acidity, I've got some organic apple cider vinegar. And I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about half a cup. of organic apple cider vinegar mixed in with it. That's natural acidity and gives them a bit of a tonic. Now, just to make this taste good, I'm now going to add some organic molasses. Here's a bit of organic molasses going in. That'll sweeten the whole mixture up. A big 2, 3, even more big spoonfuls of molasses. Not too much, just in case it will be a little bit too much for the cows, and that could give them the runs or any of the animals. It's kind of rich, creates a lot of bacterial activity, molasses. So there we go. That's the mineral mix. Now I've got to try and mix it with the cut forage, and it won't mix like that easily. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some pollard. Here's our pollard. It's just ground up corn and wheat flour. I'll mix that in just so that it makes up a nice absorbent mixture. Now all those minerals have soaked up through there. Now we've got the mineral mix soaked into the pollard now. And now it's starting to smell quite yummy actually. It smells quite nice. Now, mix that in with the cut forage. Now these plants themselves have been grown on highly mineralised manure, so they'll be high in minerals anyway. Now we've got a mix. There it is, it's all mixed through. Now we can make a mix like that and put it in the dog food. We can make a mix like that and put it in the poultry food. We can put in any of the animal feeds, and the minerals go through the animal, out through the manure, and cycle through our system and gets distributed evenly out through the farm. And we can manage that mixture, and it'll come through our compost, it'll come through our worm farms, it'll come through our food, it'll come through our compost toilet, and it'll cycle back through the system. And it's really not a lot of minerals, but it is the full complement of minerals, so they're all available. Remineralisation. Not a lot of minerals, but the full complement, and that's what's important. Interaction between elements creates a symbiotic effect. So when you see the little woolly wagtail partnering with a large animal, a wild woolly wagtail partnering with a large animal that's a domestic animal, riding on the cow's back, the cow tolerates this little interaction because the woolly wagtail's operating around the cow, eating the flies, eating the insects that the cow creates as a wave of disturbance as it grazes across the landscape. The manures that attract flies are a benefit to the woolly wagtail. The woolly wagtail itself eats the insects and manures those as an inoculum to the soil. The large cow eats the grass, turns that into a soil inoculum in a larger, cruder form. The two interact together. The cow benefits by the pesticide effect, the fly spray effect of a woolly wagtail. The woolly wagtail benefits from the disturbance and the insect attracting food source of the cow. They cooperate, they operate together symbiotically. They both improve the soil in very special ways. We need to pay attention to these natural elements, these natural partnerships. We need to look at partnerships and cooperation and harmony. It's so essential for a future world of absolute abundance. Let's look at how permaculture applies those observations to get a beneficial result. Combinations of animals working together, cooperation. The chickens here are in mobile tractors. We wind down the wheels and we move them every day or two across pasture. They get 80% of their feed from that pasture, and they scratch up the ground, they break up the cow pats, which adds extra fertility, but they break the pest cycles of the cows. And the cows come back across the land after the manure of the chickens has added nitrogen and phosphorus and other elements that the cows can't easily add. So the chickens are enhancing the pasture, the cows are enjoying that pasture and enhancing the landscape after the fertility of the chickens. So one animal breaks the pest cycle of another. The second animal then adds nutrient that the first animal can't add. The second animal then makes additions. One animal breaks up the pasture, one animal compacts the pasture. The chickens benefit from the interaction with the cows benefit from the interaction with the chickens. But what's actually happening is the soil is becoming enhanced. The soil is getting more diversity of interaction, more diversity of processed manures. We're getting eggs. In fact, I just harvested an egg before just to show you. We're getting milk. We're milking our cows right at the moment. We're getting meat from chickens and cows, and we're getting better soil all the time. It does mean design. It does mean placement. It does mean timing and strategy and a little bit of thoughtful interaction. That'll make all the difference. This imitates the interactions between animals and birds on pasture for soil improvement with good production. This is truly a polyculture where we're harmonizing with animal diversity, plant diversity, soil diversity, all for the benefit of a healthy world, healthy people. And beautiful little events that happen all the time. You know, this industrial era is all going to come to an end one day. We've been cheating time with fossilised sunlight, and we're going to have to get back to designing things through soil interactions and real sunlight time. So, when is equipment appropriate? When is ploughing appropriate? Well, we don't really want to deep plough and turn all the soil over and kill all the organisms, but there are times like that decompaction is something that's needed and equipment can do it for us quickly. So this is an old Wallace plough. It's very much like a yeoman's plough, and it will decompact the soil and bring the air back into the soil and make the soil more susceptible to harvesting water, increasing temperature and adjusting pH. Moderation of temperature, moderation of pH, and more of a soakage system of the water to the soil. Around on contour in good harmonious patterns, not straight up and downhill, but actually in a water soaking, soil enhancing way, we can use technology to bring back the fertility of the soil. And P.A. Yeomans has written all the books on this, and his famous book, Water for Every Farm, is a seminal works on water harvesting and decompaction of landscape and rehabilitation of soil. So appropriate use of machinery in the right place, in the right pattern, typically permaculture design. It's okay to use all this compost in a small area, even a small acreage crop garden, but how do we use it on a large area? How do we apply to the larger landscape? What is compost tea? Compost tea is an extension of compost. The inoculum organisms of compost extended in highly oxygenated water. A very small amount of material can extend out over an area. It takes the volume out of the compost and extends the life enormously. It is high quality compost. That's the crucial thing. You need good quality compost with lots of diversity of organisms. You can't make more organisms in compost tea, you can only extend their breed cycles. You take a volume of compost. In this case, we're using 6 litres of compost in 1,000 litres of water. We blow air through it, oxygenating through the whole system so that it's highly oxygenated water. An equal volume of air to water. So in this case, 1,000 litres of air, a cubic metre of air every minute. Whatever your volume of water is, you need the same volume of air every minute, blown through all the material and highly oxygenated, no dead spots. And some of it blows through the compost. In 3 to 4 hours, you've blown the organisms into the water. That's called an extraction. And you can put them on at that stage if you like. You will have to feed the soil so they have plenty of feed. If you want to extend their numbers, you want massive multiplications, you start the process, blow the organisms into the water, but put feed in there that actually extends their population. So we put in some worm juice out of the worm farm, highly bacterial, and we put some worm castings in the bag with the compost, extra bacteria, good quality. We put in some kelp, we put in some humate, humic acid, natural element out of the forest, extends the fungi. We put in fish hydrolysate, which is like a fish emulsion. You can use all these sort of products. You can use molasses. You can use calcium nitrate. You can even put in flour if you like to extend the fungi. You can even put a little bit of blood in there. A few drops of chicken blood will extend the... This may sound like witchcraft, but it's an extension of bacterial action. These bacterial foods and fungal foods, if you soak, loosen alfalfa in water for a few days and then pour that water in, it'll be really stimulated with protozoa, one of the elements that we're after extending in this mixture. After 24 hours, the brew's at full maximum. No more than 30 hours, 36 hours, absolute maximum. We've got a full complement of all the organisms that are going to breed in that water. We then have 6 to 8 hours to get it onto the soil. Whether that's your garden, whether that's your pasture, whether that's your trees, your crops, your orchards, whatever it is, you've got to get that on the soil. You can water it down 50 to 1, and a cubic metre like that will stimulate really degraded soil. 1 hectare of that, watered down 50 to 1, will stimulate a hectare. Quite quickly you'll do 2 hectares with it, and once you have quite a lot of organisms going in your soil, you'll be able to do 5 hectares with that 1 cubic metre. You can make a tiny little brewer in a 20-litre bucket, and it'll do a garden. And after that, after you've got your soil well and truly stimulated with organisms, it'll do a whole hectare. So this is something that you use less of over time, and you end up with an ecosystemic process in the soil. You're stimulating the soil ecosystem with a little bit of technology and some basic life science. Simple stuff. This is the future of biological agriculture. From the compost tea and the applications of high-tech compost inoculums, we dynamically increase the life in the soil. Life, bio, dynamic, to increase the activity, biodynamics. This is the work of Rudolf Steiner and the applications of inoculums to the soil. This we can do to increase fertility, And out in the broad acre, we can cover more distance with less energy inputs. But there's a limit to how far we can go. We can only apply so much before it starts getting inefficient. The natural system has limits to its sustainable application of area and edge, the size of a field, before you get another element. You can lay down crop fields of diversity, but there must be interactions with other elements like trees, animals, pasture. By permaculture design, the interactivity between all the different elements gives us the fertility. That's what gives us the sustainability. The animals to the pasture, the crops to the trees, the interactivity. We can lay out monoculture and we know it's not sustainable, one crop over a great area. We could do the same thing with multiple crops, but there is a limit. So we need to look at the increment of size application of trees to animals to crops to even aquaculture. This is the ecosystemic diversity that gives us a truly abundant, hopeful and sustainable future to look forward to.